All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling something that I think a lot of our listeners are really interested in and maybe even frustrated with weight loss.
It's a huge topic,
It is.
right? I mean, so many people struggle with it, and there's so much information out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to know what to believe.
Right, like where do you even start? So we asked you, our awesome listeners, to give us some material and you did not disappoint. You sent us Weight Loss That Lasts, Break Through the 10 Big Diet Myths by James M. Rippe, MD, and some info about Weight Watchers. So we're going to deep dive into those. The goal today is to sort of like cut through the noise and figure out, what the real deal is with weight loss, what actually works.
Right. And I think what's so interesting about these sources, especially the book,
Yeah.
is that it's combining, real solid scientific studies, but then also the experiences of people who've actually been there and done that. They've lost weight and they've kept it off.
Right.
And that's huge.
Right.
And so we're going to try to pull out some of those key insights from those resources for you.
Yeah. And chances are, if you're listening to this, you've probably tried to lose weight at some point, right?
Yeah.
You've got your own ideas about it. Maybe you've been frustrated. I know I have. And this book gets into that. It talks about those really common beliefs that we have about dieting. Like, for instance, that we need to go on some super strict diet to see any results, or that our bodies are just destined to be a certain way, or that if we just exercise more, everything will magically fall into place.
Oh, yeah.
It's not always that easy.
No, definitely not. I mean, it's way more complicated than that.
Right. And I love that this book acknowledges that and then tries to dig into the science behind it all.
Yeah. And we're going to do the same. So basically, this deep dive is about giving you a better understanding of what actually works for long-term weight loss and ditching some of those myths that might be holding us back.
Totally. Okay. Let's jump right in. So one of the biggest things that comes up again and again, and that the book talks about, is this idea that sustainable weight loss is just impossible.
Mm-hmm.
You hear all the time that, diets fail. I think there was even a statistic about it.
Oh, there's that famous 95% failure rate statistic. Yeah.
Is that real, though? It's still true?
Yeah. So the book actually dives into that statistic, and the thing is, it's true, but it's really important to understand the context. So that the number comes from research that was done way back in the 1950s.
Wow.
And obviously, our understanding of weight loss and the methods we use have changed drastically since then. I mean, even Dr. Stonekard, who was involved in that research himself, acknowledges that that number is just not really accurate anymore.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's kind of outdated information.
Yeah. And the other problem with those older studies was that they often lumped together every type of diet imaginable.
Yeah.
So they're talking about medically supervised programs to totally unproven fat. It's all the same.
Right.
And then they were usually looking at short-term weight loss, not what happens, over the long haul.
Right. Not the sustainable part.
Right. And then, one last thing that's important to think about with that statistic is that the people in those studies were going to specialized obesity clinics at research universities, which, those people often face way different challenges than the average person who's just trying to lose a few pounds.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
So it's not really a fair comparison.
Yeah.
So that 95% number, it might have been true back then, but it's not really a reflection of what's possible today.
Okay. That makes me feel a little bit better because that always loomed over me, that statistic.
It's intimidating.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. So if we can't rely on that old stat, what does the book offer as evidence that, sustainable weight loss is achievable? Where's the hope?
Right. So they point to a couple of really big sources of information.
Yeah.
One is the National Weight Control Registry, so that's NWCR. And then the other one is the Weight Watchers Lifetime Member Database.
Okay.
So these are really interesting because they have data on thousands and thousands of people who have actually lost a good amount of weight and kept it off for years.
Oh.
And that's the important part, right? Not just losing it, but keeping it off.
Yeah. The long game.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not just a few isolated cases. It's a whole bunch of real world evidence that long-term weight loss can happen.
So it is possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. It's definitely possible.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And it's not just numbers, right? The book also tells us about some of these people, their actual stories.
Right. They share some real stories from people who have been through it.
Yeah.
And one that really stood out to me was Sandra Franzik.
She had been stuck in this cycle of losing weight and then gaining it back for years. And it was like she was following all these like common weight loss myths, like the ones we were just talking about.
Uh-huh.
But then she like found Weight Watchers and she learned about like a different approach and she was able to lose the weight and keep it off. And she's kept it off for like a long time. And her story, I think, really highlights that like, lasting weight loss is possible if you can. Like get rid of those wrong ideas that we often have about it.
Right. Okay, so based on these success stories and the data from these registries, like what are some of the key things that the book identifies as being essential for keeping the weight off?
Okay, so there are a few things that like come up again and again in these stories. One is making good food choices. And that
Yeah.
doesn't mean like, starving yourself or anything crazy, but it means like being mindful of what you're eating and how much you're eating,
Right.
and portion control is a big part of that.
Right. And then, like, obviously physical activity is crucial. And it's not just about, like, burning calories. It's about, like, your overall health and well-being.
Right, right.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, this might sound kind of cheesy, but having a positive mindset is really important. Like, you know, believing in yourself and knowing that you can do it. And then finally, having a supportive environment, whether that's like your family and friends or, being part of a program like Weight Watchers where you have people to help you along the way. All of those things play a role in making weight loss last.
I think the support part is so huge because so often it feels like you're kind of fighting this battle alone.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's so much harder to do it by yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I know that some people listening might still be feeling a bit skeptical. Like, if they've tried to lose weight in the past and they haven't been successful, it's easy to think, well, that's just not for me. What would you say to someone who's feeling that way?
I mean, I totally get it. If you've been disappointed before, it's hard to stay optimistic.
Right.
But the thing is, the evidence really does suggest that it is possible,
Yeah.
especially when you look at these like big studies of people who have actually kept the weight off.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of it comes down to finding a method that actually works for you. Not some quick fix that's going to like backfire later, but something that you can stick with long term.
Right. That's sustainable.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So let's move on to another big one. I think a lot of us have probably said this to ourselves at some point. A few extra pounds, it's really not a big deal. It's just normal as we get older.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What's the truth about that?
Yeah, so the book actually addresses this head on. And the research is pretty clear. Even what seems like a small amount of extra weight can actually increase your risk for some serious health problems down the road.
Really?
Yeah, things like high blood pressure, diabetes. So it's not just about how you look or feel. It's like, it actually impacts your health in a real way.
So it's not just a vanity thing.
No, definitely not.
It's actually a health thing.
Right, okay.
Right? And this is where BMI comes in, right?
Yep.
Can you explain what that is and why it matters?
Yeah, so BMI stands for Body Mass Index. And it's basically just a calculation that uses your height and weight to figure out if your weight is in a healthy range. And the book actually gives like a table that shows you the different ranges, like what's considered healthy, overweight, obese.
Okay.
And these ranges, they're not just made up. They're based on lots of research that shows that, like, as your BMI goes up, your risk for certain diseases also goes up.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And, if you want more info on that, the book mentions the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. You can check out their website. They have a BMI table there.
Cool. And what about that old saying, oh, I'm just big bone. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, that's a classic, isn't it?
It is. It is.
The book actually talks about that too. And they explain that the idea of different frame sizes, like small, medium, and large, that came from like old weight tables that insurance companies used to use.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the thing is, those ideal body weights, they weren't really based on science. They were based on like the average weight of people who had bought life insurance from that company.
Wow.
Yeah. And then they just like divided those weights into these like random frame size categories.
Hmm.
And like the other thing is the data was mainly from white men.
Hmm.
So
Not very inclusive.
no. And the book's point is that BMI is a much more accurate way to assess your weight. So that big boned thing,
Yeah.
it's not really a valid excuse.
Okay.
Yeah.
So BMI is a better indicator. But going back to weight gain and aging, the book does say that our metabolism can slow down as we get older.
Yeah.
What's the main reason for that?
Right. So it's true that metabolism does tend to decrease with age. But the book says the biggest reason isn't actually just like hormones. It's more about how much we move. So as we get older, We often become less active, and that can lead to a loss of muscle mass, and muscle burns more calories than fat, even when you're just sitting around. So it's like, use it or lose it.
Right.
And like, even if you're not gaining weight, like the number on the scale might stay the same, but your body composition can still change if you're not active. Like you might have more fat and less muscle, which, isn't ideal for your health.
Okay. So even if the number's not budging, things could be shifting on the inside. Now, how much of a difference do those few extra pounds actually make when it comes to health risks? Like what kind of impact are we talking about?
So the book cites a pretty big study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and it found that even gaining like 10 to 20 pounds in adulthood was linked to a higher risk of death.
Wow.
Yeah, serious stuff.
Yeah.
And then there was another study that found that even just a 5% increase in BMI over time can affect things like how well you can walk.
Wow. That's kind of scary.
It is. And for women
Yeah.
specifically, there was research that showed that gaining between 21 and 30 pounds since they were 18 increased their risk for breast cancer. And that risk kept going up the more weight they gained.
So it's not something to just brush off.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And the book also gets into the whole apple versus pear body shape thing, where we carry our weight can make a difference too, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the book explains that if you have more of an apple shape, which means you carry more weight around your belly, that's actually riskier for your health than a pear shape where you carry more weight around your hips and thighs.
I've heard that before.
Yeah. And the reason for that is because that belly fat, it's closer to your organs and it's linked to a higher risk of heart disease, diabetes, and some cancers. But the good news is both apple and pear shapes can lose weight and improve their health.
That's good to know. Yeah. And you know what? The book actually shares a story from someone who experienced this firsthand. It's a woman named Donna Carter. She had gained a lot of weight, and she didn't really realize it until she saw herself in a picture one day. And she was like, oh my gosh, I need to do something about this. And she ended up joining Weight Watchers, and she lost a lot of weight, and she was actually able to get her high blood pressure under control without needing medication.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the takeaway here is that even if you don't lose a ton of weight, losing even a little bit can make a big difference in your health.
Right?
How much of a difference are we talking about? Like how much weight loss is enough to see those benefits?
Yeah, so the book says that losing just 5% of your body weight can really improve things like your heart health, your cholesterol levels, your blood pressure, and it can even lower your risk for diabetes.
Okay.
And if you can lose 10%, the benefits are even bigger. Like your blood sugar control gets better, your blood pressure goes down even more.
Wow, so that's pretty encouraging.
Yeah. And the book emphasizes that even losing a little bit of weight, especially if you lose it around your belly, can make a real difference in your health.
Okay, so what would you say to someone who's like listening to this and thinking, all right, I want to do something about this? What are some like first steps they can take?
So the book has some really practical tips. First, they say measure your waist circumference. That'll give you an idea of how much belly fat you have. And then, if you haven't had a checkup in a while, schedule one with your doctor. That way you can talk about your weight and its impact on your health and get some baseline readings of your blood pressure, cholesterol, and blood sugar.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah. And then the next step is to set some realistic weight goals. And that might mean different things for different people. Like if you're already at a healthy weight, maybe your goal is just to maintain it. But if you've been gaining weight, maybe you want to try to stabilize it. And if you're ready to lose weight, maybe you aim for that 5% or 10% loss we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally, the book says, choose a weight loss method that's actually sustainable for you.
Right.
Like not something that's going to make you miserable or that you can only do for a short time.
Right. Something that's going to work long term.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's tackle another big myth. And this one, I think a lot of us have probably bought into at some point. Willpower. It's all about willpower. If we just had enough willpower, we could achieve our weight goals.
Yeah, willpower gets so much attention, doesn't it?
It does.
It's like this magical ingredient that's supposed to solve all our problems.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So what's the real deal with willpower?
So the book has a really interesting take on this. They say that willpower is important, but it's only one part of the equation. It's often like way overblown.
Okay, so it's not the be-all and end-all.
Right. It's not like, if you just have enough willpower, you'll automatically succeed. There's more to it than that.
Yeah. So while it's not the only thing that matters, it's not completely irrelevant either, right? What are the kernels of truth that the book acknowledges about willpower in this whole weight loss thing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So they do acknowledge that. Like the mental side of things is really important, like having strategies for making good food choices, for dealing with stress, for making time for exercise.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely need that mental game. And they also talk about commitment, like that dedication to making healthier choices and sticking with them. And, some people might call that willpower. And then, knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
So the more you understand about nutrition, about how your body works, the better choices you can make, which takes some of the pressure off of willpower.
Right.
You're not just relying on willpower in every single moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But the book pushes back against this idea that people who struggle with their weight just lack willpower.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They really challenge that notion.
Yeah. Like, it's not fair to just blame people's weight on a lack of willpower. It's so much more complex than that.
Right.
There are all these other factors like genetics, environment, social pressures, all kinds of stuff that play a role.
It's not just as simple as like, you're not trying hard enough.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
It's not that simple at all.
Okay. And there's a story in the book that really illustrates this point, right?
Yeah, there is. They talk about a woman named Rebecca Hill,
Mm-hmm.
who actually describes herself as having the least willpower of anyone I know. And she
Oh.
struggled for a long time. But what really helped her was structure and support. So she joined Weight Watchers, and that gave her the framework she needed to stay focused, and she ended up losing over 40 pounds.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And her story shows that it's not just about this, inherent level of willpower, but it's about finding the right tools and strategies and support systems that work for you.
Right. Finding what works for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like relying just on willpower can actually backfire.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that? Well, if you're constantly trying to white-knuckle your way through it, relying only on willpower and you don't see the result you're hoping for, or you gain the weight back, it's really easy to start blaming yourself. You start thinking, oh, I just don't have enough willpower, I'm a failure.
Right.
And that kind of thinking can be really damaging. It makes you feel bad about yourself, and it can actually make it harder to lose weight in the long run.
So it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Yeah, kind of. So the book emphasizes that it's really important to shift away from this all or nothing thinking about willpower and instead focus on developing a more balanced and sustainable approach.
Okay, that makes sense. And this leads us to some interesting concepts the book talks about. Dietary restraint and dietary disinhibition. Can you break those down for us?
Yeah, those are good ones. So dietary restraint basically means you're constantly trying to control what you eat, like super strictly. You're counting every calorie, you're feeling stressed about food choices all the time. And the surprising thing is, that can actually make it harder to lose weight in the long run.
Really?
Yeah. Like it seems counterintuitive, but if you're too restrictive, it can backfire.
How so?
Well, think of it like if you hold a spring down really tight,
Yeah.
eventually it's going to spring back with even more force.
Right.
And that's kind of what can happen with dieting. If you're restricting yourself all the time, you're more likely to eventually give in and overeat. And then dietary disinhibition is kind of the opposite. It's basically when you feel like you have no control over your eating. Like you start eating something, maybe you didn't even really want it that much, but then you just can't stop.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that can obviously lead to weight gain too. So the book is saying that both extremes, like being super restrictive and having no control, can be problematic.
Okay. It's about finding that balance.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of finding that balance, the book shares another story, right, about someone who learned to navigate those tendencies in a healthier way.
Yeah. They talk about a woman named Christine Bogosian who learned about this concept called flexible restraint through Weight Watchers.
Yeah.
And it's basically about allowing yourself to have some treats and indulgences without feeling like you've completely blown it.
Okay.
It's about finding that middle ground.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And she also talks about how important it is to make time for exercise,
Right.
like scheduling it in.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not just relying on your willpower to get moving.
Right. You're making it a habit.
Exactly.
Okay. And then the book introduces this idea of want power alongside willpower. What's the difference?
Yeah, that's a good one. So willpower is often about like that mental strength to resist temptation, right?
Right.
But want power is more about like your deep down desires and motivations. Like, why do you want to lose weight in the first place? What's driving you?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about the food. It's about your whole approach to weight management and your overall goals for your well-being.
Okay, so it's about connecting with your why.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And what happens when willpower and want power are out of sync?
So the book explains that if you're trying to force yourself to lose weight just through sheer willpower,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably not going to work in the long run.
Right.
Like, if you're constantly restricting yourself, your body's going to rebel eventually.
Yeah, it'll fight back.
Yeah. And you'll end up feeling deprived and more likely to overeat.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So it's important to have both willpower and want power working together.
Right.
You need that motivation and that drive, and then you need the willpower to, like, help you stick to your plan.
Okay. And the book also talks about the importance of social support, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Social support is huge. Having people in your corner, whether it's your family, your friends, or, even joining a program like Weight Watchers can make a huge difference.
Right. You're not alone in it. It
Exactly.
makes a difference. And it's not just about, like, having people to cheer you on. It's also about accountability. Knowing that someone's going to ask you how you're doing, that can really help you stay on track.
Okay. And then finally, the book talks about physical activity. And it's not just about burning calories, right?
Right. It's about so much more than that. Like, exercise can actually help boost your willpower.
Really? How so?
Yeah. So when you exercise, your body releases these, like, feel-good chemicals called endorphins.
Right.
And that can make you feel more motivated and energized and less likely to give in to cravings. Plus, like, when you make exercise a regular habit, you're not just relying on willpower every time to get yourself to do it.
Right. It becomes part of your routine.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So what we're hearing is that willpower is important, but it's not everything. It's part of a bigger picture that includes, like, understanding our own eating habits, having social support, finding ways to manage stress, and making exercise a part of our lives.
Right. It's all about finding what works for you and building a sustainable lifestyle.
Yeah. And that's a great note to end on. So as we wrap up this deep dive into these common weight loss myths, what are the key takeaways you want listeners to remember?
Okay. So I think the most important things to remember are, one, sustainable weight loss is possible. Despite what you might have heard, it can be done. Two, even small amounts of weight loss can have a big impact on your health.
Right.
So don't get discouraged if you don't lose a ton of weight right away.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly. And three, willpower is important, but it's only one part of the puzzle. Focus on building a healthy lifestyle that includes good food choices, regular exercise, stress management, and support from others.
Awesome. That's really helpful. And now for you, our listener, here's something to think about. Which of these myths have you maybe bought into in the past? And what small change could you make today based on what you've learned that might help you move towards your weight goals?
Yeah, and don't be afraid to try different things until you find what works for you.
Right.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah. And remember, sustainable weight loss is a journey, not a destination.
It's about making gradual changes that you can stick with over time.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
be patient with yourself and celebrate every step along the way.
And you know what? If you're interested in learning more about some of the stuff we talked about today, the book actually recommends checking out the National Weight Control Registry. It's a really cool resource that tracks people who have successfully lost weight and kept it off.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah. And there are other organizations like the Partnership for Healthy Weight Management that have lots of evidence-based information about weight loss.
Awesome. Well, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of weight loss myths and that you found it informative and empowering.
Yeah, we hope you feel more confident and hopeful about achieving your weight goals.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.